Good morning, everyone. This is sig-aws. It is the 8th of September. A reminder that everyone that we are recording, and this will be put on the interwebs. There is an agenda for what we're going to discuss, but if you have other items, please add them to the agenda. Also, if you are able to or willing to, please sign and write your name so that we can figure out who was attending this and track back comments and things like that. The main item on the agenda is one that I put on, which is that we are in feature freeze for Kubernetes 1.8. So we have turning our attention to Kubernetes 1.9. I will just correct that little typo. To the Kubernetes 1.9 feature wish list of things that we'd like to see in AWS, the AWS cloud provider. And I put a couple of things on there. I'm sure that there are more things that could go on there, so please do add them. And I see, Arun, you added something about the federated cluster as well. But I propose we start with I guess we should quickly review what went into 1.8. I don't think there's any huge changes in AWS. No, the AWS cloud provider for Kubernetes that are going to go into 1.8 that I'm aware of. I don't know if anyone knows differently. There's some bug fixes and I think there's some extra annotations that made it in, but nothing, no huge features. Thank you to everyone that contributed, but nothing that I think will be a headline feature. Cool. So let's talk about the headline features which we'll do for Kubernetes 1.9. The ones which I put down, I'll just, I guess, traverse them first, and then we can drill down into any one of them, and hopefully people might be inspired to add some more, which is support for KMS encryption for etcd. So etcd will support encryption, and we can bridge that to KMS. The AWS, I think yesterday or the day before, I can't remember exactly, announced their new ELB, and so it would be good to support that. It feels like very similar to the existing ELB, much more similar to the existing ELB than ALB is similar to the existing ELB. That's called NLB. Something that's come up a lot in COPS, and I don't know whether other people have this same problem, which is around tagging of resources for networks. So proposing a way to better tag shared network resources in a way that doesn't require per cluster tagging. Kube-to-IAM integration has been on there, I think, ever since like 1.3. There is a pod identity working group, which is happening immediately before this, and hopefully we will make enough progress in there that we can get a good integration going on and having Kube-to-IAM work well to give pod level AWS identity. And more secure node bootstrap. So the bootstrapping of nodes, so they get better, their identity is validated by the additional information we have on AWS, which is not generally available. I don't know if we want to drill into any of those, or if anyone wants to add any more features or has any thoughts right off the bat. Otherwise, I will say that I'm generally encouraging anyone that wants to get involved to write code. I'm very happy to review it. I'm very happy to help people write code or mentor or whatever the appropriate thing is that I can do to help people with or empower people to get their code into Kubernetes. So if anyone wants to write, for example, the NLB support feels like it will be relatively similar to ELBs and might be a good starting one. Similarly, the KMS integration for etcd, my understanding is Google Cloud has a KMS type product. I think they actually call it KMS. And the etcd encryption is integrated with Google's Cloud KMS. So it would be a natural and hopefully not a good, getting started task to integrate that with AWS KMS, because there is a lot of precedent there. And in general, any other things that people want to do, I'm always generally happy to mentor and empower. I don't know if other non-COPS users have the network object selection issue. I can explain that a little bit more, which is, so you, when in particular, when you create an ELB, for example, the Kubernetes AWS cloud provider has to choose some subnets, typically is the biggest problem, to attach to the ELB. In order to choose those subnets, it looks at like the subnets that are in the zones, does some heuristics as best it can, But at the end of the day, if you have multiple subnets in your cluster, it has to make a choice somehow. And the way you can guide that choice is to use tagging. We have a tagging mechanism which we use for ownership. So in other words, to identify, which instances are part of cluster A versus part of cluster B. And that is to apply a cluster of tag, name, Kates.io. Well, the original one was Kubernetes cluster equals cluster ID. And we sort of reused that for subnet tagging. And in 1.6, we added the ability we changed the tag, or we added a second supported tag so that you could have multiple clusters associated with the subnet. Now the problem is that for each subnet that you create and want to share, you end up with a tag per cluster, and it is inconvenient for some people, at least, and a deal breaker for other people to have a tag per cluster. The deal breaker scenario is when you are like in a very security controlled environment and you're not allowed to touch your subnets in any way. So that problem comes up a lot in COPS. I don't know if people that don't use COPS have this problem. I know that Greg Taylor, you had a challenge with the format of our new tag as well. So we should probably make sure that the format works, but it would probably also address that for you. So the strawman proposal. So I'd like to hear if anyone else has this problem, and the strawman proposal is to essentially create another tag that would not be an ownership tag. Like, this is a distinct concept from ownership, so we should make it a distinct tag. And the idea is you would tag your cluster in some way with Kates.io network equals foo, and you would tag your network resources with Kates.io network equals foo, and it would sort of be a many-to-many join rather than a ownership type relationship. Comments, anyone?
I think that makes conceptual sense for sure.
And I think
I would fully support that. I think that makes a ton of sense, and it kind of just follows on the stuff that we worked on when I originally was the one who wanted to launch a bunch of clusters inside of in one subnet and VPC. So yeah, I think it makes a lot of sense. The more ability that we have to embed data in those tags is good.
Yeah, I mean, we do have a sort of general design principle, I guess, in Kubernetes or in the Kubernetes AWS cloud provider, that we prefer tags to like direct specification. And I don't know whether people, so the alternative way would be, we have this cloud config file, which is a bit of a pain to configure, but it is there. And you could like directly specify the subnets that you want. You could say like subnet ID 123 and subnet ID 456, right? I don't know whether people would prefer that. Certainly my interest is more in doing the tags, but if people would like to do an explicit enumeration of subnets per use case, we can do that. There's also Can
we already do the specific enumeration of subnets? Isn't that already in there, or it won't work with multiple clusters?
Do you mean in COPS or do you mean in Kubernetes?
Oh, sorry. Yeah, in COPS.
Yeah, so in COPS we you can like identify a subnet, but yes, then when it gets to the Kubernetes level, it's only dealing in the tags. And yeah, so the approach would be to, like, in the COPS example, have COPS put the subnets into the cloud config, which is on each machine, and Kubernetes would read that directly rather than asking the AWS API. What I like about the tags in the AWS API is you can go into the AWS API and see like which subnets have the tags, and it's, in my opinion, easier. And you don't have to change things on each machine, but it's 6 of one, half a dozen of another, maybe. Right.
And the one thing that I would think about, Justin, is, and this bites us in a bunch of places, that you can think about this sort of first time, but like what happens if somebody changes this? How do things adjust? Does the system reconcile with it, right? And as you move to a tag-based approach, it's a lot easier to be sort of really loosey-goosey about changing stuff. And that can be sort of a little bit of a whiplash as you try and reconcile things. Whereas the config file is a pain in the butt to set up and, essentially undocumented. But it has the feel of being a hell of a lot more static.
Yeah. The config file definitely is undocumented. And I think that's partially because they are flags which we recognize as valid use cases, sort of like the argument, but we don't necessarily want to encourage their use because they are relatively niche and certainly less well tested at the moment. This would obviously be a case where if we wanted to do that, we would say, we would document this as like, this is the recommended way. It does, I guess, require that there is a management layer, whoever provides it, that like in practice configures your cloud config, right? Whether that's COPS, whether that's SALT, whether that's kubeadm. I don't know if Heptio has a explicit thing, whatever solution it is, it does sort of in practice require that. But I imagine everyone actually has one of those, even if it's homegrown today.
I mean, my goal would be to keep that stuff as light as possible, right? There has to be something that kind of sets this stuff up, but the more complicated and the more fiddly we make that, the easier it is to get wrong, and the more fracture we're going to have in terms of people doing this stuff.
Cool. If anyone else has any, I think I'll probably like put together a prototype and see how we feel about the tag. I feel like the tag is pretty much the same as what we have today.
I mean, I don't have a strong horse in this race, so I'm probably not going to throw an exception or anything. But just getting a quick document that sort of outlines the options might be a useful thing to spread around and see if it catches somebody who's not on this call. As I put on sort of the, some of the work that we've been doing in SIG architecture around sort of like the proposal process and stuff like that, thinking about how do we want to sort of start seeding those ideas. This is obviously a AWS SIG specific thing, so there's no requirement to do stuff like that, but it might be a good pattern to start adopting.
I agree.
Sorry. There might be some overlap if you haven't seen it with the node authorizer work that's in 1.8. Which is about kind of taking away the node's ability to relabel itself. Basically, the control plane should be the thing that asserts labels on a node in some configurations. That might be relevant here to actually create a component. I don't think there's an extension point yet, but to create a centralized component that knows that when an instance joins the cluster, it should be labeled with a particular subnet so that you can rely on those labels for security purposes.
I will take a look. That is a good suggestion. And I think with all of these now, that like the various options are not exclusive from each other. It is, but we do obviously want to try to find one which works for everyone. And I like the idea of doing a design doc, because I think Greg Taylor pointed out a mistake I made, or a limitation I made, where it didn't work well with Terraform. Is that right? Those sort of particular syntax, and so catching those early would have been better, and hopefully this time will be different.
Yeah, and these things don't have to be super formal. It's just getting something down is incredibly useful.
Yeah. We talked about NL. Joe, in response to your chat thing, we talked about getting NLB in there. NLB feels closer to ELB in my mind than ALB was to ELB. And so
well, I think the ALB stuff is more similar to Ingress, and the NLB is a much closer fit to
exactly
sort of type equals load balancer, and the NLB stuff mirrors the L3 load balancer that GCE does. And there's a whole bunch of features that at some point we may want to enable to essentially, reduce east-west traffic and reduce hops that the Google folks have been pioneering, that makes sense with the NLB stuff, especially with health checks and stuff like that. The multiple, an IP per subnet thing is a little bit of a pain. I'm not quite sure. I haven't played with NLB enough, and maybe Arun knows, maybe some of the Amazon folks knew. If you have multiple IPs allocated to an NLB, does Amazon create a DNS record that you can CNAME to for that set of IPs, or do you have to extract the set of IPs and set up your own DNS to point to those IPs? Because right now in the Kubernetes API, there's this assumption that a type equals load balancer service has one and only one external address. Right, and so if there's a DNS entry that gets pulled out, then that's the thing that we list there. If it's a set of IP addresses, that's going to be something that's going to be a little bit more difficult to model into the Kubernetes world. Arun, have you played with this at all? Okay, yeah, it's new.
From what I could tell, so I played with it a little bit. It gets a DNS name just like an ELB does.
Okay, so it feels like ELB, except it's like a different mechanism, and you get one of those cryptic.
Yeah, I think the set of IPs, it sounds like it should change. It shouldn't change for the lifetime of the thing too. So versus ELB, where they kind of cycle.
Yeah, then it's a pretty easy fit. Yeah, that's actually really exciting.
That is good. I don't want to like contradict you, Joe, but like I did check, and technically you are allowed multiple IPs in a load balance.
Are you? Okay. No,
I'm sure that lots of things will break.
Yeah, I think most everything assumes that you're just going to have one, right?
Yeah, I'd imagine so. Like you have multiple load balancer ingress types, each of which has a single IP. Who knows what people will do, but yes.
I'm looking at the API now because I'm fascinated now. But yeah, but regardless, I think that even if the API does support it, it's going to be a little bit of a heavy lift.
Yeah, I think DNS would certainly be an easier first one. So I mean, someone, Mika, if you want to jump on NLB, that would be awesome. I mean,
yeah, I would love to.
Cool. Well, I am Justin SB on Slack if you want, and if you want to like chat about it some more. But I mean, my understanding is, as Joe says, it feels like it would be an alternate thing that would be created when you create a service of type load balancer, unlike ALB, which was a more natural fit for ingress. And I guess we can start there and find out, what the differences are. And yeah, I would love to see that. And so the hardest thing is actually going to be upgrading the AWS SDK. So I'm going to tackle that. In other words, GoDeps. I'm going to tackle that as soon as the new branch opens. Well, I think there is a PR open, but of course it won't have NLB in it. So.
Right. Okay. So base that off the 1.9 branch, release 1.9.
Which will be the master branch, I think. Yes.
Okay. Great.
I don't see any realistic way we can get this into 1.8, which is the way it is. I think. We could also look at doing it externally, but I feel like that's just going to be a lot more work. Yeah. No. Lots of shaking of heads. And then Matt Moyer, if you want to tackle KMS, that would be awesome.
Yeah.
A little bit of background on that, like, the etcd encryption went in. There is a pluggable key provider mechanism, and I believe a PR went in pretty late to do Google KMS. So hopefully, I hate it when people say just to me. It's always like a manager. It's like, you just have to do this, and then it ends up taking a week. But you just have to like implement the AWS equivalent to the.
Yeah, I had looked at this before. I've used AWS KMS before, and I think it should map just fine. There was some concern. There was some discussion. There's an issue open about making that KMS provider interface pluggable out of tree. So right now the KMS backends are like an in-tree plugin interface. Obviously there's a strong desire to add new things out of tree, but that extension mechanism doesn't exist. So that might be another thing that lands in 1.9.
I did not put it on the 1.9 feature because it's something I'm trying to avoid getting sucked into, but there is a general move to like move cloud providers out of Kube Controller Manager into Cloud Controller Manager. My gut feel then is therefore that the right thing to do for AWS is, implement it however Google has done it, i.e. in tree. It'll move into Cloud Controller Manager at some future release. They will all be fragmented into like separate repos or whatever we end up doing, is my gut feel. And like, let's not get sucked into that argument unless you really want to. I am reading your comment, Joe, but I will.
It's not worth rattling about right now.
That load balance IP is the spec. That is the requested public IP.
I think that thing unfortunately gets reused for both the input and the output.
Well, the good news is that won't work on AWS. So.
All right, I may be right. Let's not rat hole on it right now.
But yeah, those are the. So I don't know how people feel about that wish list of features. Oh yes, and then so Kube.im integrating with the pod identity working group, which is hopefully we'll deliver the things that we need to make that more Kubernetes-y. And Greg, you asked about more secure node bootstrap. So this is just something that I came across. So Kubernetes has a functionality in, I think, 1.7, I guess. It was sort of, I don't know when it was alpha, when it was beta, but where the kubelets get a per node certificate. It's part of like general hardening. So to like limit, I think, Joe, you call it the blast radius, right? The blast radius if like a node is compromised.
Yeah.
And the way that uses the CSR, the Certificate Signing Request API, there is not a lot of additional functionality beyond the idea that if you have a token and can write a CSR, is my understanding, you can basically get any node certificate you want. And I feel like there's an obvious opportunity to do a little bit better on, well, any particular installation can do better. AWS is a particular installation, and I'm wondering if we can like write an emission controller, like check the IP or whatever it is, just like whatever small steps it is. The node document might, so the identity document in the IAM metadata is another one. It will be more challenging to get that into the existing flow, but it is certainly, like there's a meta question, which is like, do we want to actually just write our own flow entirely? My gut feel is no, but yeah, we could try to leverage that identity document. We could try to leverage, the fact that hopefully IP addresses are more controlled and like we're more confident in IP addresses. We can like cross-check IP addresses against the AWS API. Those are the sort of things I'm thinking, just to give a little bit more like confidence in a node, a node's kubelet certificate actually identifying the node. And I think it's important because it ties into the node is probably going to end up, well, we'll see what happens, but the container identity, like if the node ends up signing the pod identity, then we better be 100% sure that node identity is 100% correct. That's sort of just something it's at the bottom of the list. It's sort of more of a wish list item. I don't think GCE has anything here either, so it is much more experimental. So,
I mean, Moira, you've been involved with the container identity stuff and SPIFFE, and there's a ton of overlap here. So with SPIFFE, with the reference implementation for SPIFFE, which has been named Spire, there's this idea of attesters, and it's a pluggable model where you could have the AWS attester that actually sort of partners with the client and the server to actually sort of use extra information to be able to verify things. Not sure exactly, Matt, I don't know if you have more context on this than I do.
Yeah, so I think the way the Bootstrap certificate bootstrapping system works right now, there's two good points where we could extend it for an AWS specific configuration. One is the actual Bootstrap tokens themselves. We could replace that with an AWS specific kind of token scheme where you get a token that's from your instance identity document, or there's some other tricks you can do with STS, get caller identity, and pre-signing. There's Vault sort of pioneered these kind of tricks. Anyway, but you can get a token that represents your instance identity, and you write an authorizer plugin, authenticator plugin on the server that recognizes the identity and sort of says like, oh, that's this node. Then you can give that identity access to the CSR API as sort of a Bootstrap identity. So now that node is able to, and I think this would all work with Kubelet if you plugged that token into Kubelet's bootstrapping. Kubelet will go issue a CSR. Then there's another extension point, which is a CSR approver that can sit there, and it's a controller that looks at the CSR. That CSR contains the user and group that the Bootstrap identity authenticated as. And then you can sort of look up that information, which that information would ideally have like an instance ID. So you could then go call out to the EC2 API, see if that matched your group of valid target nodes that should be spinning up, and then mark that CSR as approved, and it'll get signed and returned to the node. I think that would be a really relatively straightforward for AWS specifically.
The nice thing there is that it uses extension points. Yeah, that's really cool.
And we should try to find out, I guess, if GCE is concerned about this and is doing anything, because like ideally we don't want to do something totally different from what they're doing. But yeah, I don't even know who it would be. Maybe Mike Denise. I don't know.
Yeah, Mike would probably be the right person to talk to there on the GCE side.
And just so I understand, just to kind of verify, this would allow us to do away with static Bootstrap tokens.
Yeah,
or
and
you'd take the static bootstrap token and you'd augment them with with a token that also mixes in VM specific identity. Right? Just because you're an AWS VM doesn't mean that you should be able to bootstrap. So there's a combination, right?
You could always say that initial bootstrap token that you hand off, and you're writing a plugin, right, that's authenticating it, so you can do whatever you want. So you could add in an extra shared secret to that too.
Yeah. And there's still the issue of identifying or validating the server, right? And making sure that when the node wants to talk to the server, it's actually talking to the server it thinks it's talking to, right? And so that, we could use the public key signature stuff that Moyer put in the 1.8 cycle, but doing that with the symmetric token is a extra check. Yeah, I mean, this just somebody has to build it.
There is a lot of overlap too here with it. Joe mentioned Spiffy, Inspire. This is the exact kind of use case, and this would be sort of covered by a set of AWS specific plugins for Spire, which are being written right now. So that's another potential implementation.
So we'll seek inspiration from that then.
I hopefully we can get to the point where that's something that you can actually look at, touch, and use, and then it becomes much more serious discussion about okay, can we actually use that? So I've been trying to be careful about not over-promising around that stuff, because it's still very much a work in progress. But I'm optimistic that by the end of the year there'll actually be some real meat on the bones there that folks can really get their hands dirty with.
And I can talk a little bit about the details of what that looks like right now, because some of the pieces have kind of materialized. So there would be a node agent that ran on the instances outside of Kubernetes that had a plugin that talked to the EC2 identity service or something like that to assert to test the identity of that node. When the kubelet started up, or some script that wraps the kubelet starts up, it could talk to that node agent and get an identity that was attested through the Spiffy control plane that would let you bootstrap kubelet. And then the follow-on then is eventually when you have pods running, pods would also somehow be able to talk to that node agent, which would have a plugin that understood Kubernetes pod membership and could give them Spiffy identities that were workload specific. Some of the pieces exist, some of it's still kind of in the air, but there's definitely overlap.
So I think that's exciting. I don't know if anyone else has any other features or whether we should move on to the next item, which is JG Mize. I don't know your first name, I'm sorry, but you asked about the status of the
external. Do you remember your mechanism, how you did that?
Yeah, that's me, Josh Mize, JG Mize. I was just wondering if I added a few notes below. I know it's available behind feature flag and cops, which is upgraded Route 53 mapper in favor of it, but I don't know if there's any momentum, if anyone's using it in production, what any sort of timeline. Last I've heard of it was or seen anything was July, so I just wondered if there were any updates on that.
And so then you just pushed a branch or something. And then,
yeah. Were you able to hear me?
Yeah, we just heard someone else. I didn't know whether. I think that was your background though, so I think that's fine.
Sorry, there's another meeting going on.
I just wanted to I wanted to check enough to mute someone else. I think what you said is the summary that's in there is absolutely correct. The long-term goal remains to use it. It seems to be making a lot of great progress. It's like the shining example of things making progress outside of core, because they have seems like they have a new provider every day. I think there are some feature gaps, which I think Eric and Seth, have you guys been looking at it? So I think that's sort of
it's missing a bunch of stuff that we need. We need multiple targets so we could do the node IPs and stuff. I have a bunch of PRs I'm still working on, but it hasn't really moved anywhere in a while.
I think yes, we would like to get it integrated. I'm working on other things in other clouds in COPS, and maybe one of them it will be more convenient to use external DNS, and that will motivate me to do those things. That's sort of the status. As far as I know, though, if you outside of COPS, it is a good, I don't know if anyone is using it in production, but I believe it's pretty good and like the recommended Route 53 integration comments. So yeah, I mean, I think like for exposing ingress, I think it works well, is my understanding. And that to me is like the canonical. Kops deliberately keeps its hands off that for now, and so that you can, you know, create an ingress, and the external Route 53 project or the external DNS project will then configure your DNS with that ingress, which to me is like what I've always wanted, where you create your ingress for your blog and it pops up, you know, the WordPress example. That's pretty cool in my opinion.
A banner up
So I see that Eric has commented that they're using it in prod and reactive app apps as well. So thank you very much for the update and the information.
And then we do the DNS switch.
Cool. Next on the agenda, Arun, you want to talk about federated clusters? I know, yes, I know you were going to investigate it last time. I think you had some issues. I've been like snowed under personally. I saw about not responding for those yet. I'm going to get there, but we had massive test failures. But you want to talk about the federated cluster?
I can. Yes, I can. So I've been able to set up a federated cluster where there are 2 clusters set up in 2 regions, and use kubefed to set up a federation between them. The first time I set up the cluster, it took actually quite a few hours for the cluster to be ready and shown, you know, as part of the federation. But, you know, I said, okay, I'll delete the clusters all over again, and I'll start all over again, and I created the clusters. And at that time, it took about 15 to 20 minutes for the clusters to become part of the federation. So that was not bad. I filed a bug for that anyway. It's not reproducible, so I can't really give anything specific details on that. So I left it at that. But the bigger challenge for me is if I'm trying to do any deployment, you know, any replica set or any artifact to that federated cluster, it says, you know, nothing deploys actually. You know, it just keeps waiting. You know, I just put a watch on the kubectl, say, okay, show me the status as the status is changing. I waited for a few minutes. You know, I left it at one point over 2 hours, but nothing gets deployed with no error returning back. I'm wondering, how should I debug this further?
You know, honestly, this is probably not the right SIG for that. I think the Federation SIG, which is moving into, I think, multi-cluster, they're rebranding themselves. And I think, you know, I don't want to speak for them, but my understanding is that there's a little bit of a reset around sort of the approach that the Federation folks have been taking. And moving to a much, you know, and again, I might be speaking out of turn here, but I think it's moving towards a more sort of decoupled idea of dealing with multiple clusters versus an overarching single API endpoint around federation, right? And so I do know that there's a lot of discussion going on in that world. I haven't been tracking it closely myself, though. I think maybe somebody else in the meeting here has.
So as you know, if we were to, well, the 2 reasons I brought it up to this SIG is because this was cluster running on AWS. One, second, it was using kops. But I understand, you know, the Federation SIG might be a better place. I did not get any feedback. I posted a message on that SIG as well. I did not get any feedback. Maybe I'll poke them a little bit harder. But is the thought process that if anybody is recommending federate, so is the thought process that we should not be recommending federation?
I don't recommend federation to our clients right now.
Okay, let me ask the question differently. Is anybody here, you know, for the people who are present on the call, is anybody using federation? Apparently not.
I will say that I am very excited about its long-term possibility, but I definitely second the not recommending it for production to anyone at this point.
Yeah, we've been watching it at Reddit, but our sentiment right now is that our usage cases are simple enough that we feel more comfortable separately orchestrating similar clusters across AZs. And we find that to be just a lot easier to reason with right now. And fortunately, the Kubernetes API and the clients make this pretty simple proposition. So, yeah, that's really sort.
So in terms of a pseudo federation, what you're doing is essentially you're not doing a federation, but you are setting up clusters across multiple AZs.
We're setting up single AZ clusters that have mostly mirrored workloads.
Okay, and so even the masters are across on the same AZ?
Yeah, so it's the entire cluster is within a single AZ. And
Gotcha.
then there's a similar cluster running in a different AZ.
Okay. Okay. All right.
I mean, I think that's sort of the, again, I don't want to speak for Federation, but I think like the challenge with it is that the promise is that it is an equivalent scenario to running like a deploy across 3 clusters. If you're running your deploy in continuous integration, it doesn't really hurt you that much to run your deploy across 3 clusters, and you don't have to worry about federation.
So essentially your pipeline, will take care of deploying across those multiple clusters, as opposed to saying, go deploy to this federated cluster.
Right.
I think the analogy here, Arun, is like multi-region in AWS, right? There are a few systems that work multi-region, but most of the time coordinating things across region in AWS is left to an exercise for the reader. I think the analogy there is that, multiple clusters, there's systems, there's promise there's a lot of ideas. I just don't think it's a solved problem yet.
Yeah, and that's the feeling I'm getting as well. Okay, cool. I think I will dig on this a little bit deeper, not a whole lot, but see, if it's a known issue, or because I did file a bug, in the Kubernetes repo, tagged it to SIG Federation, and I've not seen any input on that yet. So I presume they maybe know the issue or something is happening on that. I'll maybe try to discuss this in the Federation SIG as well once again, and then park it, if there is no resolution coming on this. And I agree, setting up multiple clusters seems like the right approach and the pragmatic approach given the current state of kubefed and other binaries.
Yeah. Now the whole sort of like, within a region doing a single cluster stretching across AZs, which Kops makes super easy, or like what Greg is doing, which is a cluster per AZ with the coordination. I think reasonable people can differ on that, and I think there's trade-offs to be made. I don't think that there's a one right answer there.
Yeah, I agree. And that's sort of my thought process as well, because I've seen our customers deploying clusters across multiple AZs in a region just to get master high availability. If push comes to shove, I've seen the approach that Greg is talking about, where you have exact duplicate cluster across multiple AZs in a region, and then that gives you AB and whatever you want to do with that.
I think one of the problems, though, is that a lot of regions don't have 3 AZs. And so you really can't get a single high availability cluster that is sort of AZ proof or AZ down proof in a region that only has 2 AZs. It's just because you can't do quorum.
Yeah. No, I agree. Okay, sounds good.
Yeah, I definitely agree that like reasonable people can disagree. To me, the most motivational example is like if you're doing a stateful service, a persistent set, or whatever we're calling it today, then that is where you do, if you actually are running like an HA database on your Kubernetes cluster, you probably want that in multiple AZs until federation comes along, right? And like lets you, like that's where a federation I think gets the most stateful sets, the most interesting when a stateful set can span clusters to me. And yeah, I've also been like, I've been trying to reproduce. I've been trying to find time to reproduce your use case, Arun, because it certainly worked better about a year ago. It didn't, like I got to the point where I was grappling with the load balancer, the ingress. So I will have a look when I have time and try to figure out where things have gotten worse. But it may be
okay. Well, I have a workspace. I created a GitHub repo where I talk about how the federated cluster can be set up. But then that's exactly where I'm stuck on, how do you deploy an application over there? But I'm definitely aware there are multiple approaches of not going the federation route and the pros and cons. Okay, sounds good.
Cool. So we are at 45. We have a couple of minutes left. I don't know if anyone else put anything else on the agenda, or if anyone wants to verbally add something to the agenda or talk about their feelings.
Happy Friday.
I guess happy Friday, everyone.
Well, I guess before we hang up, if anybody's interested on collaborating some on IAM scoping in various situations, I'd be particularly interested in talking with anybody who has been scoping to particular subnets or using certain tagging strategies. What I'm trying to aim at is we've got a larger VPC, a legacy VPC. It's got a lot of stuff in it, and we'd like to stick a cluster in a subnet and try to tightly scope it as much as possible. So if you done anything similar, I'd be interested in talking and comparing nodes.
Greg, there are some people working on AWS that are using COPS that actually put in some of that scoping, and we hit a problem. But oh yeah, that's another one I want to add in. Yes, one of the things is that. So there is some of that in COPS already, and you'll see that there are some limitations around that today. And so there's a small, I will call it a bug fix more than a feature I want to get in, which is that like create volume today is a create volume and then create tags process. And in March of this year, they added the ability to create volume with tags. Our AWS SDK is not updated to that version yet. Another reason to like bump it. But then when we do that, then you'll be able to do, you'll be able to create an IAM policy that restricts your ability to create a volume to only volumes that have the tags, which will be another step. And then, all modified volume will be able to be restricted to, everything will be able to be restricted to that. And I think, Arun, if you're able to surface a feature request, like the more of those that we can get, I think there's like create security group is another one right now, which is needed for your first ELB. We create or actually, I guess every ELB creates a dedicated security group right now. And that still has the two-step process. So there's no way to restrict create security group by restrict the tags that you do. So any of those, I suspect, given what happened in March, that like this is a gradual continuation and more will be atomically done. But it also solves the problem that in theory we leak if something crashes, right? Like if we create security group crash, we might not be able to retag it. And we have some tricks, but they are not foolproof.
Do we want to stick this in our future wish list?
Yeah, let's put it on there. I'll put it on there.
Yeah.
It is honestly, it's a very easy fix once the AWS SDK Go is updated.
Do we have a issue for that? I assume we have an issue for that already somewhere.
There is an issue. Let me see if I can find it. For creating the volume, I didn't create an issue for updating the SDK Go. The number is number 50898. How did they get so big? Let me put it in here, and then I'll try to put a link in. Oh, let's see. All right.
So the SDK bump will be a separate issue.
Yeah, there's actually a PR to do an SDK bump, so. Cool. I might just ask that person, beg that person to like go to the latest version, so we get NLB as well. I presume NLB is coming.
Okay. I'm happy to chime in there if we include the link to that, and I guess I can search too and try to find it.
I'm pasting it in now. I just have the world's slowest laptop that I use Zoom on.
It's all right.
Let's see. But yeah, I don't know if anyone else has anything else. I will put this in the agenda. Did you want to put something about more IAM lockdown? I don't know if there's certainly if there are other features we should do in Kubernetes to enable that, like the create volume should create tags at the same time.
I think you got the right idea in that, as the simultaneous create and tag APIs start surfacing, jump on them. But I think we have another one. I guess
there were two that were done in March. I don't remember what the other one was off the top of my head.
Yeah, me neither.
Instances. So we don't actually have that problem because we don't we don't create instances in the AWS cloud provider, and I believe most people that are creating instances actually create auto-scaling groups. So. Cool. Well, if that is all, then I wish you all a happy Friday. Stay safe away from any storms or anything, and see you in 2 weeks.
Take care.
Shut down all the
Thanks,
workers.
Justin.
When
Thanks,
the,
everybody.
Q goes to 0. And so now